good morning again. We had some technical difficulties, so I was talking to myself for like, I don't know, 3 minutes or so. So good morning, we bookworms. Welcome to our live stream here on Facebook as every Saturday morning at 11:30 a.m. It's a bit cloudy today. It's not sunny. Usually we have sun, but in Northern Ireland, strangely enough, but not today. So we're going to continue reading The Velveteen Rabbit, and we also received a note from Belle, and she also sent us some fairy dust. She heard that a lot of you missed the fairy dust last week, so she sent us extra special fairy dust. So, but first of all, let's read what she sent us. A tale from Belle. The story of fairy gardens. A few months ago, I visited with Mummy, Daddy and Finn an incredibly lovely fairy garden in the Slieveguillion Forest Park in Northern Ireland. My dear grandparents live there in a lovely hollow tree in the middle of the forest. There are no grumpy gnomes, but the birds can be troublesome from time to time. Once, a very naughty robin stole my granny's freshly hung up laundry from the fairy garden. Granny and Grandad had no more socks to wear for a week. You know, a lot of fairies make their own clothes, and Granny had to knit 20 pairs of socks. Well, I said to her that she could have used a magic knitting spell instead, but Granny insisted on knitting the socks herself. What would the world come to if we only use magic spells? She said to me. I love fairy gardens because you can taste the magic in the air, don't you think? To me, the air in fairy gardens tastes just like magic of fairy lemonade. All sorts of creatures, not only birds, foxes, mice and rabbits, live in the fairy garden at We Bookworms, and by now you have met most of them. There are unicorns and grumpy gnomes and mermaids, and of course Rupert the careless cat. So fairy gardens are not only for fairies, but for all magical creatures. Why are they called fairy gardens then, you wonder? That is actually quite easily explained. There are invisible builders and gardeners that happen to be fairies. They fly around when the moon is out and they search for a spot they like. Then they build a fairy garden, and then for weeks, months, or even years after, they make the fairy garden grow. They build more bridges and more houses and plant more flowers and trees. Why don't you make your own little fairy garden? You don't even need much space. Us fairies are rather small, so a plant pot will do nicely. We like some greenery. Flowers are especially popular. And then we also need a tiny house, although the fairy garden builders are happy to build one. At night, magic will come to your little fairy garden. Fairy gardeners and fairy builders always find fairy gardens that were made by humans and make them extra magical. And do you know how you can help a fairy garden grow? Just say, I believe in fairies, and I'm sure that you will see a flower pop up somewhere nearby. Believing in us fairies is very important indeed. Oh, thank you, Belle, wherever you are. And here's our fairy dust. And this time I'm going to say, I believe in fairies. So maybe you could shout that as well. I believe in fairies! There you go. Because I do believe in fairies, you know. I've met Belle, I've talked loads of times with her about different things. So anyway, The Velveteen Rabbit. We started to read this lovely book last week, and I'm going to give you a bit of a summary of the first few pages. So basically, the Velveteen Rabbit is given to a little boy as a Christmas present, and the Velveteen Rabbit can talk to some of the nursery toys, to some of the other toys in the nursery. And there's one special toy. It's a horse, a skin horse, and they have a really interesting conversation about what is real and what is not, because the Velveteen Rabbit feels like he's not real, but the skin horse tells him that If a child loves him very, very much and plays with him every day, all the time, then he's real. And that's sort of where we are now. We know that the little boy really likes the Velveteen Rabbit and he likes to play with him a lot. So yeah, let's see what happens next. Oh, more technical issue. No. Is it okay? Yeah. Okay. No.
This is not very involved.
Okay. I got my special rabbit mug as well. Sorry for all the technical issues today. Oops, that was close. Anyway, so let's see what's going to happen next. And so time went on, and the little rabbit was very happy. So happy that he never noticed how his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier, and his tail coming unsewn, and all the pink rubbed off his nose, where the boy had kissed him. Spring came, and they had long days in the garden, for wherever the boy went, the rabbit went too. He had rides in a wheelbarrow, and picnics on the grass, and lovely fairy huts built for him under the raspberry canes behind the flower border. And once when the boy was called away suddenly to go out to tea, the rabbit was left out on the lawn until long after dusk, and Nana had to come and look for him with the candle, because the boy couldn't go to sleep unless he was there. He was wet through with the dew, and quite earthy from diving into the burrows the boy had made for him in the flower bed, and Nana grumbled as she rubbed him off with a corner of her apron. "You must have your old bunny," she said. "Fancy all that fuss for a toy." The boy sat up in bed and stretched out his hands. "Give me my bunny," he said. "You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real." When the little rabbit heard that he was happy, for he knew that what the skin horse had said was true at last. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was a toy no longer. He was real. The boy himself had said it. That night he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred in his little sawdust heart that it almost burst. And into his boot-button eyes that had long ago lost their polish, there came a look of wisdom and beauty, so that even Nana noticed it next morning when she picked him up and said, "I declare if that old bunny hasn't got quite a knowing expression." That was a wonderful summer. Near the house where they lived there was a wood, and in the long June evenings the boy liked to go there after tea to play. He took the Velveteen Rabbit with him, and before he wandered off to pick flowers or play at bridgeons among the trees, he always made the rabbit a little nest somewhere among the bracken, where he would be quite cozy, for he was a kind-hearted little boy, and he liked Bunny to be comfortable. One evening, while the rabbit was lying there alone, watching the ants that ran to and fro between his velvet paws and the grass, he saw two strange beings creep out of the tall bracken near him. They were rabbits like himself, but quite furry and brand new. They must have been very well made, for their seams didn't show at all, and they changed shape in a queer way when they moved. One minute they were long and thin, and the next minute fat and bunchy, instead of always staying the same like he did. Their feet padded softly on the ground, and they crept quite close to him, twitching their noses, while the rabbit stared hard to see which side the clockwork stuck out, for he knew that people who jump generally have something to wind them up. But he couldn't see it. They were evidently a new kind of rabbit altogether. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back, and all the time their noses twitched. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" one of them asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain that he had no clockwork. "Huh," said the furry rabbit, "it's as easy as anything," and he gave a big hop sideways and stood on his hind legs. I don't believe you can, he said. I can, said the little rabbit. I can jump higher than anything. He meant when the boy threw him, but of course he didn't want to say so. Can you hop on your hind legs? Asked the furry rabbit. That was a dreadful question, for the Velveteen Rabbit had no hind legs at all. The back of him was made all in one piece, like a pincushion. He sat still in the bracken and hoped that the other rabbits wouldn't notice. I don't want to, he said again. But the wild rabbits have very sharp eyes, and this one stretched out his neck and looked. He hasn't got any hind legs, he called out. Fancy a rabbit without any hind legs. And he began to laugh. I have, cried the little rabbit. I have got hind legs. I'm sitting on them. Then stretch them out and show me like this, said the wild rabbit, and he began to whirl round and dance till the little rabbit got quite dizzy. I don't like dancing, he said. I'd rather sit still. But all the while he was longing to dance, for a funny new tickly feeling ran through him, and he felt he would give anything in the world to be able to jump about like these rabbits did. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came quite close. He came so close this time that his long whiskers brushed the Velveteen Rabbit's ear, and then he wrinkled his nose suddenly and flattened his ears and jumped backwards. He doesn't smell right, he exclaimed. He isn't a rabbit at all. He isn't real. I am real, said the little rabbit. I am real. The boy said so. And he nearly began to cry. Just then there was a sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past near them, and with a stamp of feet and a flash of white tails, the two strange rabbits disappeared. Come back and play with me, called the little rabbit. Oh, do come back. I know I am real. But there was no answer. Only the little ants ran to and fro, and the bracken swayed gently where the two strangers had passed. The Velveteen Rabbit was all alone. Oh dear, he thought. Why did they run away like that? Why couldn't they stop and talk to me? For a long time he lay very still, watching the bracken and hoping that they would come back. But they never returned. And presently the sun sank lower, and the little white moths fluttered out, and the boy came and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby, but the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved all his whiskers off, and the pink lining to his ears turned grey, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and he scarcely looked like a rabbit any more, except to the boy. To him, he was always beautiful, and that was all that the little rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real, and when you're real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then, one day, the boy was ill. His face grew very flushed, and he talked in his sleep, and his little body was so hot that it burned the rabbit when he held him close. Strange people came and went in the nursery, and the light burned all night, and through it all the little Velveteen Rabbit lay there, hidden from sight under the bedclothes, and he never stirred, for he was afraid that if they found him, someone might take him away, and he knew that the boy needed him. It was a long weary time, for the boy was too ill to play, and the little rabbit found it rather dull, with nothing to do all day long. But he snuggled down patiently and looked forward to the time when the boy should be well again, and they would go out in the garden amongst the flowers and the butterflies and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket like they used to. All sorts of delightful things he planned, and while the boy lay half asleep, he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. And presently the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at picture books, while the little rabbit cuddled close at his side. And one day they let him get up and dress. So we're going to finish the story next weekend. No?
No.
Yes, no, the last bit is, very, you'll see next week. It's a really lovely tale, as I said, you probably know by now, the Velveteen Rabbit. So yeah, we're gonna finish it next week, again at 11:30 a.m. And yeah, sorry again for the technical issues, and I hope you enjoyed it anyway. And we'll see you next week. Okay, bye.